The conference room on the 42nd floor of Finch Global Holdings fell into the kind of silence that precedes catastrophe. Through floor-to-ceiling windows, Manhattan stretched below like a kingdom of glass and ambition. But inside, the air had turned to ice. Gregory Finch stood at the head of the table, his 6'3" frame radiating the kind of power that made billion-dollar deals and broke careers with equal efficiency. His steel-grey eyes fixed on the trembling woman across from him, a senior executive who had dared to present a diversity initiative. "Let me be extraordinarily clear." His voice was velvet over granite, each word precisely measured. "I don't build empires by catering to sentiment. Results matter, numbers matter, everything else is noise." The woman's file hit the table with a sound like a gunshot. 23 people held their breath. That's when Sophia Reed did what no one in that room had ever witnessed. She stood, not with aggression, but with a grace that commanded attention. Her voice, when it came, was steady as a heartbeat. "With respect, Mr. Finch, you're wrong." The temperature in the room plummeted. Gregory's head turned slowly, his gaze landing on the woman who had spoken. New hire, first day, standing when everyone else had learned to disappear. "What did you say?" The question was silk-wrapped danger. Sophia met his eyes without flinching. "I said you're wrong, and I can prove it." In that moment, something shifted, not just in the room, but in the carefully constructed fortress Gregory Finch had built around his heart for the past 15 years. War had been declared, and neither of them knew yet that it would end in surrender. The morning Sophia Reed walked through the revolving doors of Finch Global Holdings, she carried 3 things: her grandmother's vintage leather portfolio, a master's degree from Wharton that she'd earned while working 3 jobs, and the absolute certainty that she hadn't fought her way to this moment to be anyone's footnote. The lobby was a cathedral of modern power, Italian marble underfoot, abstract sculptures worth more than most homes, and a reception desk curved like a wave of polished obsidian. Everything whispered money, influence, and the kind of exclusivity that most people only glimpsed through magazine pages. "Sophia Reed, here for orientation," she told the receptionist, a woman whose smile was professional but whose eyes held a flicker of something else. Pity, warning. 42nd floor. "HR will meet you." The woman's voice dropped slightly. "Word of advice? Keep your head down today. Mr. Finch is in one of his moods." Sophia had heard the stories. Gregory Finch, self-made billionaire who'd built his empire from nothing, was legendary in financial circles, brilliant, ruthless, and infamous for something else, a documented history of driving every woman who reached executive level either out of the company or into nervous breakdowns. Some called it coincidence. Others called it strategy. Sophia called it exactly what she'd spent her entire career learning to dismantle. The elevator rose with whisper-quiet efficiency, floor numbers glowing in soft gold. Sophia caught her reflection in the mirrored walls, her natural hair styled in an elegant twist, her suit tailored to perfection, her posture radiating the confidence her mother had taught her to project, even when the world tried to make her small. "You're a Reed woman," her grandmother used to say. "We don't shrink. We don't apologize for taking up space. We walk into rooms like we built them." The 42nd floor opened onto a vista of pure corporate theatre. Glass walls revealed a trading floor buzzing with controlled chaos, screens flickering with real-time data from markets across the globe. The scent of expensive coffee mingled with the subtle fragrance of leather and ambition. Ms. Reed, a woman in her early 50s, approached, her expression professionally neutral, but her handshake firm. "I'm Patricia Valdez, Senior VP of Human Resources. Welcome to Finch Global." The orientation began with the standard corporate ritual: benefits packages, security badges, employee handbook. But Sophia noticed something peculiar. Of the 7 new hires starting that day, she was the only woman. And the way Patricia's voice took on a carefully measured tone when discussing company culture set off alarms. "Mr. Finch has very high standards," Patricia explained as they walked toward the executive wing. "He expects excellence without exception. He's direct in his communication style." "You mean he's an asshole to women?" said a voice from behind them. They turned to find a young man, maybe 30, with the kind of expensive haircut that spoke of Madison Avenue salons. His grin was conspiratorial. "Marcus Chen, senior analyst." He extended his hand to Sophia. "And before HR gives me that look, I'm just saying what everyone thinks. Gregory Finch hates women in positions of power. He'll tolerate them in support roles, but get too close to his inner circle." He made a cutting gesture across his throat. "That's enough, Mr. Chen." Patricia's voice was sharp, but Sophia had seen the truth in the woman's eyes. This wasn't gossip, it was a warning. "I appreciate the honesty," Sophia said quietly, "but I didn't come here to be tolerated. I came here because I'm the best financial analyst Wharton produced in the last 5 years, and your company needs what I can do." Marcus's eyebrows rose. "I like you. Try not to get fired before lunch." The morning passed in a blur of system passwords, department introductions, and the slow realization that Finch Global Holdings was a company divided. The men moved with casual confidence through marble corridors. The women, and there were notably few in senior positions, carried themselves with the careful neutrality of people walking through a minefield. By 11 o'clock, Sophia had been assigned her workspace, a glass-walled office with a view of the Hudson River that would have been breathtaking if not for the tension crackling through the air like static before a storm. "Executive board meeting in 10 minutes, her assistant, a nervous young man named James, informed her. "All senior staff required to attend. Even new hires. Mr. Finch wants everyone to understand how things work here." The boardroom was a masterpiece of intimidation architecture. A table of gleaming dark wood stretched nearly 30 feet, surrounded by leather chairs that probably cost more than Sophia's first car. Original artwork. She recognized a Rothko, adorned walls painted in shades of charcoal and steel. 23 people filed in with the practiced efficiency of those who'd performed this ritual countless times. Sophia noticed immediately 18 men, 5 women. The women clustered at one end of the table like survivors of a shipwreck, clinging to the same debris. Then Gregory Finch entered, and the room's energy shifted like a change in atmospheric pressure. He was taller than she'd expected, and younger, maybe 45, with the kind of face that photographers loved and enemies feared. His suit was bespoke, clearly Italian, and he moved with the unconscious grace of someone who'd never doubted his right to command any space he occupied. His hair, more salt than pepper, was cut with precision, but it was his eyes, grey as winter storms, that held the real power. Those eyes swept the room with the efficiency of a predator cataloguing prey, and when they landed on Sophia, something flickered in their depths. Surprise? Calculation? It was gone too quickly to read. "Let's begin." His voice was exactly what she'd expected, deep, cultured, with the kind of authority that didn't need to be raised to command attention. Q3 performance exceeded projections by 12%. Q4 targets have been adjusted accordingly. He moved through the agenda with surgical precision, markets analyzed, strategies dissected, heads nodded, no one interrupted, no one questioned, until the topic of the European expansion came up. A woman Sophia later learned was Jennifer Hastings, VP of International Development, stood to present. She was polished, prepared, and according to the whispers Sophia had heard, had been with the company for 11 years. The Berlin office has identified an opportunity in sustainable tech, Jennifer began, her voice steady. The market research indicates you've been listening to consultants instead of understanding fundamentals. Gregory's interruption was smooth as a knife through silk. Jennifer's face paled, but she continued. Sir, if you look at slide 7, I don't need to look at slide 7. I need you to explain why you're proposing we invest $50 million in a sector that's overvalued and underperforming. The projections show that you've mistaken a trend for a transformation. He stood, and somehow the room seemed to shrink around him. This is precisely the kind of emotional decision-making that costs companies their competitive edge. You're recommending this because it feels good, not because it makes financial sense. The air in the room turned toxic. Jennifer's hands trembled slightly as she gripped her presentation remote. Mr. Finch, I've spent 6 months, reaching the wrong conclusion. His voice was colder now, clinical. Jennifer, you've been a valuable contributor in execution roles, but strategic thinking requires a different kind of rigor. Perhaps it's time we reassess where your talents are best utilized. The silence that followed was suffocating. 23 people witnessed a career being dismantled in real time, and not one of them moved, not one of them spoke. Sophia felt her grandmother's voice echo in her mind. We don't shrink. She stood. The sound of her chair moving was like thunder in the stillness. Every eye turned to her. Gregory Finch's gaze locked onto hers with the intensity of a spotlight, and in that moment, Sophia understood why people feared him. Those grey eyes held intelligence sharp enough to cut, and something else, a cold fury at being challenged. Ms. Reed. His voice could have frozen the Hudson. You've been with this company for approximately... He glanced at his watch, a platinum piece that probably cost more than her student loans. 3 hours? Do you have something to contribute to this discussion? Yes. Her voice was calm, steady, betraying none of the adrenaline coursing through her veins. I have a question. A question. He repeated the words as if they were foreign. Proceed. Have you actually read Ms. Hastings' full analysis, or are you basing your rejection on the executive summary? The temperature in the room dropped to Arctic levels. Someone, she thought it was Marcus, actually gasped. Gregory Finch took 3 steps toward her. Even across the expanse of that massive table, his presence was overwhelming. Are you suggesting I make decisions without full information? I'm suggesting that Ms. Hastings' proposal has merit that isn't captured in a presentation format. The sustainable tech sector in Berlin isn't a trend. It's a strategic position in a market that will dominate the next decade. Dismissing it as emotional decision-making ignores the data. The data. He moved closer, rounding the table with predatory grace. And you've reviewed this data in your 3 hours of employment. I've reviewed similar market analyses in my graduate research. The fundamentals are sound. The projected ROI is conservative. And with respect, sir, dismissing a proposal because of who presents it, rather than what it contains, is the kind of emotional decision-making that costs companies their competitive edge. She'd thrown his own words back at him. Everyone in that room knew it. Gregory Finch stopped 5 feet from where she stood. Up close he was even more imposing, and she noticed details the distance had hidden. Fine lines at the corners of his eyes, a small scar along his jawline, and in those grey depths, something that might have been surprise warring with fury. Interesting. The word was silk-wrapped steel. Tell me, Ms. Reed, do they teach recklessness at Wharton, or is this talent purely innate? They teach critical analysis and the courage to speak truth to power. I'm simply applying my education. For 5 seconds, that felt like 5 hours. He studied her. She could feel him taking her measure, not just her words, but everything about her. Her posture, her unwavering gaze. The fact that while her heart was hammering against her ribs, her hands remained perfectly still at her sides. Then he smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "My office tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock. He turned back to the room at large. Meeting adjourned. He left the boardroom like a storm passing, taking all the oxygen with him. The moment the door closed, the room erupted in whispered chaos. Jennifer Hastings approached Sophia, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes," Sophia said quietly. "I did." Marcus appeared at her elbow, his expression torn between admiration and horror. "Do you have any idea what you just did? No one contradicts Gregory Finch, no one, and definitely not in front of the entire executive board." "Then maybe it was overdue." "It was career suicide." His voice dropped to a whisper. "That 6 a.m. meeting, that's where he destroys people. He'll spend an hour cataloguing every flaw, every mistake, every reason you're inadequate. Then he'll give you a choice. Resign with a reference or be terminated for cause. He's done it to 7 women in the last 5 years. Sophia picked up her portfolio, that vintage leather her grandmother had carried through her own battles. "Then, I guess I should prepare an excellent defense." She walked out of that boardroom with her head high, even though she could feel 23 pairs of eyes burning into her back, even though her hands were shaking, even though a small, terrified voice in her head was screaming that she'd just committed professional suicide on her first day. But louder than that, fear was her grandmother's voice. "We don't shrink. We don't apologize for taking up space." As she passed a glass wall overlooking the city, Sophia caught a reflection, not her own, but Gregory Finch's, standing in his corner office 40 floors above. He was watching her. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of that gaze. Tomorrow morning, 6 o'clock, she had 15 hours to prepare for a battle she couldn't afford to lose. In his office, Gregory Finch stood perfectly still, watching the woman who'd just done something no one had dared do in over a decade. His jaw was tight. His hands, usually so controlled, had formed fists at his sides. Sophia Reed. He pulled up her file on his computer. Wharton, top of her class. 3 years at Morgan Stanley before this. References that read like love letters. And nowhere in all that pristine documentation was there any warning that she would be foolish enough or brave enough to stand up to him in front of his entire executive team. He should be furious. He was furious. But beneath the anger was something else, something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Curiosity. And that, Gregory knew with absolute certainty, was dangerous. Tomorrow morning at 6 o'clock he would remind Sophia Reed exactly why people feared him. He would dismantle her arguments, expose her presumption, and teach her the lesson everyone at Finch Global eventually learned. This was his empire, and he answered to no one. But as the Manhattan skyline darkened into evening, Gregory found himself unable to shake the image of those defiant eyes meeting his without flinching. The way she'd stood when everyone else had learned to cower, the precision of her words, turning his own argument into a weapon against him. He closed her file and turned back to the window. Tomorrow at 6 o'clock. This was either going to be the shortest conversation of his professional life or the beginning of something he hadn't accounted for in any of his carefully constructed plans. In the war between Gregory Finch's will and Sophia Reed's courage, the first shot had been fired, and neither of them knew yet that in this battle there could be no winners, only transformation. The city was still draped in pre-dawn darkness when Sophia's alarm pierced the silence at 4:30 in the morning. She'd slept 3 hours, if the fitful half-consciousness that had held her could be called sleep. Every time she'd closed her eyes, she'd seen Gregory Finch's face, that predatory smile, those storm-grey eyes promising devastation. Her apartment in Brooklyn was small, but meticulously organized. A studio she'd fought to afford in a neighborhood that was gentrifying faster than her salary could keep pace with. The exposed brick walls held framed photographs. Her grandmother at her college graduation, her mother's pride shining through tired eyes, her own younger self accepting her Wharton degree with a smile that said, "I made it against every odd." She made coffee strong enough to strip paint, the bitter scent filling the small space as Manhattan's skyline began to glow across the East River. Through her single window, she could see the towers of the financial district, catching the first hints of sunrise, monuments to ambition, power, and the kind of wealth that could crush people like insects. Gregory Finch lived in that world. Sophia had merely been granted temporary access. She dressed with the precision of someone preparing for battle. A different suit today, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, tailored to perfection. Pearl earrings her grandmother had given her, minimal makeup that emphasized rather than concealed. Hair pulled back in a style that was both elegant and severe. In her portfolio, she'd placed something she'd worked on until 2 in the morning, a 40-page analysis of Finch Global Holdings that she'd compiled using public data, financial reports, and her own research from the past 3 months before she'd even been hired. Every vulnerability, every missed opportunity, every place where Gregory Finch's prejudice had created blind spots that cost his company money. If he wanted to destroy her, she'd make sure he knew exactly what he was destroying. The subway at 5:15 was a different world, cleaning crews heading home, hospital workers changing shifts, and the occasional banker already running on ambition and caffeine. Sophia stood near the door, holding the pole with one hand and mentally rehearsing the conversation ahead. Stay calm, present facts. Don't let him provoke an emotional response. That's what he wants, proof that women can't handle pressure. Manhattan at 5:45 was a city of shadows and streetlights, garbage trucks and delivery vans. The Finch Global Holdings Tower rose like a monument to ego, its glass facade reflecting the lightening sky in shades of silver and gold. Security recognized her. Word traveled fast in buildings like this. The guard's expression held something between respect and pity. 42nd floor, she said, though he already knew. Good luck, he replied quietly. The elevator ride felt longer than yesterday, each floor a countdown to confrontation. When the doors opened onto the executive level, the space was eerily empty, just ambient lighting and the soft hum of climate control. Through the glass walls, she could see the trading floor below, still dark and dormant. Gregory Finch's office occupied the northwest corner, a space that commanded views of both the Hudson River and the sprawl of Midtown. Light spilled from beneath his door. Sophia checked her watch. 5:58. She knocked at precisely 6 o'clock. Enter. His voice was muffled by the heavy wood door, but still carried that note of absolute authority. The office was exactly what she'd expected, and nothing like it at the same time. Yes, there was the massive desk of dark walnut, the leather chairs that probably cost more than her monthly rent, the original artwork that belonged in museums. But there were also unexpected details. Bookshelves lined with volumes that showed signs of actual reading, a vintage globe that looked like an antique, and on one wall, a single photograph of a much younger Gregory Finch standing beside an older man, his father perhaps, in front of what looked like a construction site. Gregory himself stood by the windows, silhouetted against the growing dawn. He wore a different suit, navy this time, with a precision that suggested a tailor who understood architecture. His tie was already perfectly knotted at 5:58 in the morning. He didn't turn when she entered. "Close the door," he said. Sophia did, and the soft click felt like the sealing of a tomb. "I assume you spent the evening preparing your resignation." He still didn't turn, his gaze fixed on something in the distance. That would be the intelligent choice. Leave with dignity. "I'll provide a neutral reference. You can find employment elsewhere, somewhere that values enthusiasm over judgment." "I didn't prepare a resignation." Sophia moved further into the room, refusing to hover by the door like a supplicant. "I prepared an analysis." Now he turned. In the half-light of dawn, his face was all angles and shadows, his expression unreadable. "An analysis of your company's performance over the past 5 years. She set her portfolio on one of the chairs facing his desk, not his desk itself, which would have been presumptuous, but close enough to signal she wasn't cowering. Specifically, the correlation between your hiring and promotion patterns and your missed market opportunities. Something flickered across his face. Surprise? Anger? It was gone before she could identify it. "You've been employed for 1 day, less than 24 hours. And you believe you can analyze an organization I spent 2 decades building?" "I believe I can analyze patterns, and the patterns are clear." She opened her portfolio, extracting the document she'd compiled. "In the past 5 years, Finch Global Holdings has missed 17 significant market opportunities. 12 of those opportunities were initially identified by women in your organization. All 12 proposals were rejected or significantly modified by male leadership." Coincidence? But his voice had shifted, becoming sharper, more focused. "Statistically improbable, especially when 7 of those rejected opportunities were subsequently pursued by your competitors, resulting in an estimated $3.2 billion in market value you could have captured first." She pulled out a chart, laying it on the desk between them with steady hands. "The Berlin Sustainable Tech Proposal, Ms. Hastings presented yesterday. Your competitor, Meridian Capital, is finalizing a similar position this quarter. Your rejection gives them first-mover advantage in a market projected to be worth $90 billion by 2030. Gregory moved to his desk, his movements controlled but quick. He didn't sit. Instead, he leaned forward, palms flat on the polished surface, studying her document with an intensity that felt physical. The silence stretched. Sophia could hear her own heartbeat, the soft whisper of climate control, the distant hum of the city waking below them. "Interesting data manipulation," he said finally. "You've cherry-picked examples to support a predetermined conclusion. I've identified a pattern that's costing you competitive advantage. The data supports itself. What it supports is confirmation bias. You came into this company believing I'm prejudiced against women. You found examples that appear to confirm that belief. Classic cognitive error. Then explain the pattern." She took a step closer to the desk, meeting his gaze across the document. "Explain why proposals from women are rejected at 3 times the rate of proposals from men with equivalent credentials and similar market analysis. Because the proposals from women have been, statistically, weaker, or because the evaluation criteria are biased." Sophia pulled out another sheet. "I analyze the language used in performance reviews for male and female executives at comparable levels. Men are described as strategic, decisive, bold. Women with identical performance metrics are described as emotional, impulsive, aggressive. You hacked our internal HR systems?" His voice was dangerously quiet. "I analyzed publicly available information from EEOC filings and exit interviews published in business journals. Your company has been sued 4 times for gender discrimination in the past 7 years. All 4 cases were settled with NDAs, but the pattern is public record." Gregory straightened slowly, his full height suddenly intimidating in the enclosed space. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of absolute authority. Let me be extraordinarily clear about something, Ms. Reed. I built this company from nothing. My father was a construction foreman who worked himself into an early grave, trying to give me opportunities he never had. I learned that success requires ruthlessness, discipline, and the elimination of sentiment from decision-making. Those principles built an empire worth $47 billion. He moved around the desk, closing the distance between them, and Sophia forced herself not to retreat. What you call prejudice, I call pattern recognition. In my experience, women in positions of power prioritize consensus over decisiveness, emotion over analysis, relationships over results. Those are fatal flaws in high-stakes environments. In your experience, Sophia's voice was steady despite the adrenaline flooding her system, which is based on a sample size contaminated by your own bias. You don't trust women in leadership, so you create environments where they can't succeed, which confirms your belief that they can't succeed. It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, or it's experience validated by outcomes. It's a blind spot that's costing you billions. They stood less than 3 feet apart now, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark hair, the faint lines that suggested he smiled less than he frowned, and something else, a flicker of something in those grey eyes that looked almost like recognition. You have exceptional confidence for someone in an extraordinarily precarious position. His voice was quieter now, but no less dangerous. Why? Because I'm right, and somewhere beneath all this armor, you're intelligent enough to know it. The words hung in the air between them like a thrown gauntlet. Gregory's jaw tightened. For a moment, she thought she'd finally pushed too far, that he would simply call security and have her removed from the building. Instead, he laughed. It was a short, sharp sound, completely devoid of humor. Remarkable. He returned to his desk, this time sitting in the leather chair with the languid grace of a king on a throne. You stand in my office at 6 in the morning, insult my judgment, question my intelligence, and expect what exactly? A promotion? I expect you to give me a chance to prove my value beyond your preconceptions. And if I decline, if I terminate your employment, which would be entirely justified given your insubordination, then you'll have confirmed that you're exactly what everyone says you are, a brilliant man limited by his inability to see past his own wounds. The temperature in the room plummeted. Gregory's expression went perfectly still, and Sophia knew with absolute certainty that she'd struck something deep and true. My wounds. His voice was silk over razors. Something happened that made you like this. Something that convinced you women in power are threats to be neutralized rather than assets to be developed. And whatever it was, you've let it calcify into doctrine. For 10 seconds, she counted them, Gregory Finch said nothing. He simply studied her with an intensity that felt like dissection, as if he could see through skin and bone to the motivations underneath. Then he opened a drawer in his desk and extracted a file. Thick, pristine, marked with a red flag. He laid it on the desk between them. The Castellano Division. European operations, primarily focused on luxury goods and high-end retail. We acquired it 6 years ago for $1.8 billion. It's currently bleeding money at a rate of approximately $90 million per quarter. The board wants to liquidate. I've been resisting because I believe there's value we haven't unlocked. He pushed the file toward her. You have 90 days to turn it around. Full access to data, limited budget authority, and the understanding that if you fail, it confirms every assessment I've ever made about women's strategic capabilities. Sophia stared at the file, understanding immediately what he was doing. This wasn't an opportunity, it was a trap, a project complex enough and compromised enough that failure was almost guaranteed, allowing him to point to her defeat as proof of his theories. "And if I succeed," she asked quietly, "then we'll have an interesting conversation about my alleged blind spots." She picked up the file, feeling the weight of it, both physical and metaphorical. 90 days, a failing division, limited resources, and the unspoken understanding that every person in the company would be watching to see if she crashed and burned. "I accept?" "Of course you do." Something that might have been respect flickered in his eyes. "You're too stubborn to recognize a suicide mission when it's handed to you, or too competent to let your expectations define my limitations." Gregory stood, buttoning his suit jacket with practiced precision. "Your workspace will be cleared by this afternoon. You'll have a budget analyst assigned to you by end of day. The quarterly review presentation to the board is scheduled for 90 days from today, January 15th. If the division isn't profitable or positioned for clear turnaround by then, both you and the project are terminated." He moved to the door, opening it. A clear dismissal. But Sophia had one more question. "Why?" she asked. "If you really believe I'll fail, why give me the chance?" Gregory paused, his hand on the doorframe, his profile illuminated by the strengthening dawn light. "Because one of two things will happen, Ms. Reed. Either you'll fail, and I'll have definitive proof that I'm right. Or you'll succeed, and I'll have to confront the possibility that I've been wrong for the past 15 years. He turned to look at her directly. "Either outcome is valuable information. And if I succeed, you lose your justification for the way you've treated half your workforce. If you succeed, I'll have to rebuild an entire philosophy of leadership, which would be, depending on one's perspective, either catastrophic or liberating." He held her gaze for a moment longer, and something passed between them, not understanding, not trust, but perhaps the recognition of equal and opposite forces meeting in collision. "Don't fail, Ms. Reed. Not for your sake, for theirs." He gestured vaguely toward the executive level beyond his door. "Every woman in this building is watching to see if you're different. If you fall, you take their hope with you." Indeed, then he was gone, striding down the corridor with the confidence of someone who'd never doubted his right to command any space he occupied. Sophia stood alone in his office, holding the file that would determine not just her career, but potentially her entire future. Her hands were shaking now, the adrenaline finally catching up with her conscious control. Through the windows, Manhattan was fully awake, the city glittering in morning sun like a promise and a threat in equal measure. 90 days. She opened the file and began to read. By the time she reached page 3, she understood why Gregory Finch had smiled when she'd accepted the challenge. The Castellano division wasn't just bleeding money. It was hemorrhaging from wounds so deep and systemic that every analyst who'd reviewed it recommended liquidation. The European retail market was contracting. The luxury goods sector was being disrupted by direct-to-consumer brands. The company's brand positioning was outdated. And the management team currently running operations was, according to these reports, either incompetent or actively sabotaging the division's success. This wasn't a challenge. It was corporate execution dressed up as opportunity. Sophia closed the file and looked at her reflection in the dark glass of Gregory's desk. Her grandmother's words echoed in her mind. "The only way out is through." She picked up her portfolio, the file, and walked out of Gregory Finch's office with her head high. If he wanted a war, she'd give him one, and when the smoke cleared, one of them would have to admit they'd been fundamentally wrong about everything they believed. In her heart, Sophia knew it wouldn't be her. But in a small, traitorous corner of her mind, she wondered what it would take to crack the armor of a man who'd turned his wounds into weapons, and whether, in saving a failing division, she might also have to save Gregory Finch from himself. The thought should have terrified her. Instead, as she walked past the awakening executive offices, past the stares and whispers of people who'd already heard about the 6 o'clock meeting, past Marcus Chen, who looked at her like she'd returned from the dead, Sophia felt something dangerous ignite in her chest. Not just determination, something fiercer. The absolute certainty that Gregory Finch had just made the biggest miscalculation of his brilliant career. He'd given her ammunition, and she always hit her target. The first 30 days were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Sophia commandeered a conference room on the 41st floor, transforming it into what Marcus Chen privately called the War Room. 3 walls became canvas for data, market analyses, consumer demographics, competitive positioning charts. The 4th wall, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson, remained clear, a reminder that beyond the numbers existed a real world where real people made decisions with their wallets and their hearts. She worked 16-hour days, sometimes 18. Her apartment in Brooklyn became merely a place to shower and change clothes before returning to the fluorescent-lit battlefield. Coffee became a food group. Sleep became a luxury she couldn't afford. The Castellano division's problems were worse than the file had suggested. Much worse. The European management team had spent 3 years essentially embezzling through elaborate consulting contracts. The luxury retail stores occupied premium locations with lease agreements that were financial suicide. And the brand itself, once synonymous with elegance, had become what one brutal market analysis called what your grandmother wore when she wanted to feel young. Though it was, by any rational measure, unsalvageable, which meant Sophia had to be irrational. She started by firing the entire European management team, a move that required 3 conference calls with legal and Gregory's direct signature. He'd provided it without comment, though she'd caught him watching her through his office windows more than once, his expression unreadable. Then she'd analyzed every piece of the business, searching for the one thread that, if pulled correctly, might unravel the disaster into something resembling opportunity. She found it on day 23 at 2 in the morning, her eyes burning from staring at spreadsheets and her back aching from hours hunched over her laptop. The stores were doomed. The brand was dated. But the supply chain, the actual manufacturers, the artisans in Milan and Florence and Paris who created the products, they were extraordinary, and they were being utilized at maybe 30% capacity. What if they didn't save the retail operation? What if they transformed it? The idea that crystallized at 2:17 in the morning was either brilliant or insane, and Sophia was too exhausted to determine which. Instead of fighting the direct-to-consumer trend, embrace it. Shut down the stores, terminate the retail leases, and reposition Castellano as an ultra-premium, made-to-order luxury brand that partnered with the world's top designers on limited capsule collections. Scarcity instead of availability. Artisan collaboration instead of mass production, digital storytelling instead of physical retail. It would require convincing designers to partner with a brand currently associated with their grandmothers. It would require renegotiating every supplier contract. And it would require the kind of capital investment that Gregory Finch would never approve, unless she could prove the concept first. She'd spent the next 7 days building a prototype strategy, complete with financial projections, marketing mock-ups, and a list of 3 designers who might be willing to take a meeting. One of them was based in Paris, a rising star named Céleste Marchand, whose avant-garde designs were being featured in every fashion magazine, from Vogue to Harper's Bazaar. Getting the meeting had required calling in every favor Sophia had accumulated in her professional life. Getting Gregory Finch to Paris to join her for that meeting had required something else entirely. Absolutely not. He hadn't even looked up from his computer screen when she'd presented the proposal. Send someone from the existing team. There is no existing team. I fired them, remember? And this requires executive presence. Marchand needs to believe we're serious. Then you go alone. She won't meet with anyone below C-suite level. Her assistant made that clear. This is a $70 million a year designer who gets courted by LVMH monthly. We need to send the message that we're playing at her level. That had made him look up. You want me to fly to Paris to beg a fashion designer for a collaboration that will save a division I'm prepared to liquidate? I want you to fly to Paris to see the future of luxury goods before your competitors lock up every meaningful partnership in the space. Gregory had studied her for a long moment, those grey eyes calculating. You've been working on this for 30 days. You're exhausted, probably not sleeping, certainly not eating properly. And you think the solution to a billion-dollar problem is to shut down revenue-generating assets and bet everything on a model that didn't exist in your original analysis? Yes. This is desperation masquerading as innovation. This is innovation informed by reality. The retail model is dead. We're just arguing about when to have the funeral. He'd leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled beneath his chin. A gesture she'd learned meant he was genuinely considering something, rather than simply preparing to dismiss it. 1 meeting, 2 days. If Marchand isn't interested, you pivot to liquidation planning. Agreed. And Ms. Reed? His voice had stopped her at the door. If this fails, you'll have spent 30 days and considerable resources pursuing a fantasy. That will reflect in your performance evaluation. If this succeeds, you'll have to admit I was right. That will reflect in yours. She'd caught the ghost of something that might have been a smile before his expression returned to its customary severity. 3 days later, they were on a Finch global corporate jet crossing the Atlantic, and Sophia was discovering that proximity to Gregory Finch at 35,000 feet was an entirely different experience than proximity in a Manhattan office tower. The jet was luxury incarnate, cream leather seats that reclined to beds, a conference table of polished walnut, ambient lighting that shifted from energizing to calming based on time of day. Gregory had claimed the forward cabin, spreading documents across every surface with the organized chaos of someone who thought in 3 dimensions. Sophia had taken the opposite end, partly for space and partly because watching him work was distracting in ways she didn't want to examine. He'd removed his suit jacket an hour into the flight, rolled his shirt sleeves to his elbows, revealing forearms that suggested he did more than sit behind a desk. His reading glasses, she hadn't known he wore them, gave him an almost vulnerable quality that vanished the moment he looked up. The Marchand meeting is at 10. Tomorrow morning, she said, breaking the silence that had stretched for the past hour. Her atelier is in Le Marais. I've arranged for... I know where it is. I've read your briefing document twice. He didn't look up from the contract he was reviewing. Do you always over-prepare, or is this special anxiety reserved for meetings that will determine your professional survival? I prepare appropriately for high-stakes situations. You prepare obsessively for everything. I've been watching you for 30 days. You arrive before anyone else. You leave after everyone's gone. You've lost weight. When was the last time you slept more than 4 hours? The observation caught her off guard. She hadn't realized he'd been paying that much attention. I sleep when the work is done. The work is never done. That's the fundamental illusion of corporate achievement. He set down his pen, finally meeting her eyes. You're going to burn out before you hit the 60-day mark. I'm fine. You're running on adrenaline and stubbornness. I recognize it because I spent my 20s doing exactly the same thing. He stood, moving to the bar and pouring 2 glasses of water. He handed her one, the gesture surprisingly thoughtful. Drink. You're probably dehydrated, which affects cognitive function. Sophia took the glass, thrown by this sudden concern from a man who'd spent 30 days treating her like an experiment in human limitations. Why do you care if I burn out? Wouldn't that prove your point about women in high-pressure positions? Gregory returned to his seat, but instead of his work, he focused on her with an intensity that felt physical. Contrary to your analysis, I don't actually want you to fail. That would be wasteful. You're extraordinarily talented, even if you're also extraordinarily reckless. He paused. What I want is for you to succeed within realistic parameters. Or fail definitively enough that we both learn something. How generous. Honesty, not generosity. He leaned forward slightly. Tell me something, Ms. Reed. Why this? Why finance? Why corporate warfare? Why fighting so hard to prove yourself in a world designed to break people like you? The question was too personal, too searching, but something about the altitude, or the exhaustion, or the strange intimacy of this leather and mahogany cocoon made Sophia answer truthfully. My grandmother cleaned houses for 40 years. Wealthy houses, where she saw up close how money creates options, how power creates safety. She used to tell me about the women in those houses, some of them brilliant, all of them dependent on husbands, on fathers, on men who could withdraw support the moment they became inconvenient. She looked out the window at clouds that glowed silver in moonlight. She saved every dollar she could, put me through undergrad, told me that the only way to be safe in this world was to build my own empire, answer to no one, and never, ever let anyone make me small. Sophia turned back to Gregory. So that's what I'm doing, building something no one can take away. Gregory was quiet for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, your grandmother sounds formidable. She was. She died my second year at Wharton. Heart attack while scrubbing someone else's floor. The old anger flared, sharp and clean. I keep a photo of her at my desk, reminder of why I can't afford to fail. Can't afford, or won't allow yourself to? Is there a difference? Yes. He stood again, this time moving to the window beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne. Something subtle and expensive that probably cost more than her monthly rent. One is about external constraints, the other is about internal demons. He was close enough that she could see the fine lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples, and something else, a weariness that suggested his armor wasn't as impenetrable as he pretended. What are your demons, Mr. Finch? The question hung between them, too intimate for their professional relationship, too honest for the walls they'd both built. Gregory, he said quietly, if we're discussing demons at midnight over the Atlantic, we should probably use first names. Gregory. The name felt strange on her tongue, too personal. What made you like this? He studied her for a long moment, and she thought he would deflect, retreat behind corporate distance. Instead, he surprised her. 15 years ago, I had a business partner, brilliant woman, Harvard MBA, 3 years older than me. We built the foundation of Finch Global together. She handled operations, I handled strategy. We were going to revolutionize private equity. His jaw tightened. We were also engaged. Sophia's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Victoria Chen, Marcus's older sister actually, though he joined the company years after she left. Gregory's voice was carefully neutral, but she could hear the edges of old wounds beneath the control. For 3 years, we built everything together. Then we won the contract that would have made us, a massive infrastructure deal with a Middle Eastern sovereign wealth fund. $2.7 billion, the kind of deal that transforms companies. He turned back to the window, his reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. 2 weeks before signing, Victoria disappeared, along with 18 months of proprietary research, client lists, strategic plans, and $7 million in operating capital. She'd been systematically copying everything to a competitor, our competitor, They used our work to steal the deal, and Victoria became their VP of operations. The silence that followed was suffocating. Gregory, the betrayal wasn't just professional. We were supposed to get married that summer. I found out about the theft the same day I found out she'd been sleeping with the competitor's CEO for 6 months. His laugh was bitter. So yes, Ms. Reed, Sophia, I have trust issues with women in positions of power, because the last time I made that mistake, it cost me everything I'd spent 5 years building. Sophia felt something crack in her chest. Not pity, Gregory Finch would hate pity, but understanding. So you built walls, she said softly, made sure no woman could ever get close enough to hurt you again, professionally or personally. I built a company that answers only to me, where loyalty is rewarded and betrayal is impossible because I trust no one enough to betray. He turned back to her, and his eyes were raw in a way she'd never seen. Until you walked into that boardroom and made me question whether I've spent 15 years punishing innocent people for one person's sins. The air between them suddenly felt charged, electric. They stood too close, the normal boundaries of professional distance erased by altitude and confession. I'm not Victoria, Sophia said, her voice barely above a whisper. No. His gaze moved over her face, lingering on details, the curve of her jaw, the determination in her eyes, the pulse beating at her throat. You're nothing like her, which is precisely the problem. What problem? You're making me reconsider conclusions I thought were absolute. That's uncomfortable. Good, Sophia said, surprising herself with her boldness. You've been comfortable for 15 years. Comfortable in your certainty, your control, your fortress of one. Maybe it's time someone made you uncomfortable. Gregory's eyes darkened, something shifting in their grey depths that sent heat flooding through Sophia's veins. Careful, Sophia. You're already fighting one impossible battle. You might not want to start another. Who says I'm not willing to fight on multiple fronts? The tension between them pulled taut as a violin string, and Sophia realized with sudden clarity that something had fundamentally shifted. They weren't just CEO and analyst anymore. They weren't even just adversaries testing each other's limits. They were two people, alone at midnight above the Atlantic, and the walls they'd both built were showing cracks. Gregory lifted his hand, and for one breathless moment Sophia thought he might touch her face. His fingers hovered near her cheek, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his skin. This is a phenomenally bad idea, he said, but he didn't lower his hand. Most of my best ideas have been phenomenally bad. I noticed. Almost a smile, and it transformed his face from severe to something dangerously attractive. That first day, when you stood up in that boardroom. I should have been furious. You were furious. I was terrified. The admission seemed to surprise him as much as it surprised her, because in that moment I knew you were going to be either my greatest mistake or my salvation, and I couldn't tell which. Have you figured it out yet? No, but I'm beginning to suspect it might be both. His hand finally made contact, fingers ghosting along her jawline with a gentleness that contradicted everything she knew about Gregory Finch. His touch was warm, careful, asking a question his words hadn't formed yet. Sophia's heart hammered against her ribs. This was dangerous territory. This was her boss. This was a man who'd spent 30 days testing her limits and 15 years hating everything she represented. This was also the first time in her professional life she'd felt truly seen. She leaned into his touch, her answer wordless but absolute. Gregory's breath caught. His thumb traced her lower lip, and the tenderness of the gesture nearly undid her. They were close enough now that she could see flecks of darker grey in his eyes, the slight unevenness of his breathing, the war between logic and desire playing out across his features. "Sophia," he said, her name a question and a warning and a prayer all at once. She answered by rising slightly on her toes, closing the last inches between them. His lips were a breath away from hers when his phone erupted with the sharp insistence of an emergency ringtone. They froze, the spell shattered. Gregory's expression shifted from vulnerable to controlled in the space of a heartbeat. He stepped back, already reaching for his phone, and the loss of his warmth felt like a physical blow. "Finch." His voice was clipped, professional, betraying nothing of what had almost happened. Sophia watched his face change as he listened. The color drained from his features, his jaw clenched. When he spoke again, his voice was ice. "When? How much? Who authorized the—" He stopped, listening. "I'll be wheels down in 6 hours. Convene the board for emergency session." He ended the call with controlled violence, the phone clattering onto the conference table. "What happened?" Sophia asked, though the dread in her stomach already knew it was catastrophic. Gregory turned to her, and his eyes held something she'd never seen there before, genuine fear. "The Castellano division, our primary supplier in Milan, just declared bankruptcy. They were handling 80% of our production capacity." He ran a hand through his hair, destroying its perfect arrangement. "Without them, we have no product to relaunch. No timeline to meet Marchand. No proof of concept." The bottom dropped out of Sophia's world. "Can we find alternative suppliers?" "Not at the quality level required, not in time. The suppliers that can match our standards are already contracted to competitors with waiting lists measured in years." He looked at her, and she saw her own career ending reflected in his eyes. "The Marchand meeting is pointless. The project is dead." "No." Sophia's mind was already racing, analyzing, searching for solutions in the wreckage. "There has to be." "There isn't." Gregory's voice was gentle but final. "I'm sorry, Sophia. You fought brilliantly, but some battles can't be won. I don't accept that. Accepting reality isn't optional." He moved past her toward his cabin. "Get some sleep. We'll deal with the board when we return to New York." He disappeared behind the cabin door, leaving Sophia alone with the ruins of her strategy and the ghost of an almost kiss that would haunt her forever. She sank into the leather seat, staring at her own reflection in the dark window. Beyond the glass, clouds glowed silver in moonlight, beautiful and utterly indifferent to human ambition. 30 days of work, 16-hour shifts, every skill she'd spent a decade developing, and it ended not with failure, but with a supplier bankruptcy she couldn't have predicted or prevented. Gregory was right. Some battles couldn't be won. But as the jet cut through darkness toward Paris, a city she'd now see only as a grave marker for her career, something hardened in Sophia's chest. She hadn't come this far to surrender to circumstance. Her grandmother hadn't scrubbed floors for 40 years, so Sophia could quit when the odds turned impossible. There was always another move, always another angle. She just had to find it before the board meeting that would end everything. And she had to find it while carrying the weight of what had almost happened between her and Gregory, that moment of vulnerability that had nearly transformed everything. The jet engines hummed their steady rhythm. Paris drew closer, and Sophia Reed began to plan for a miracle she had no idea how to create. But one thing she knew with absolute certainty: she would find a way, or she would go down fighting. Because Reed women didn't shrink. They didn't apologize for taking up space. And they sure as hell didn't give up just because the universe decided to make things interesting. Paris at dawn was a contradiction. Ancient stone buildings glowing golden in new light. The Seine reflecting a sky caught between darkness and day. From her hotel window at the Hotel Plaza Athénée, Sophia watched the city wake with the detached observation of someone who'd stopped sleeping entirely. 3 hours. That's all she'd managed before her mind resumed its relentless cataloguing of impossible problems and non-existent solutions. The Castellano supplier bankruptcy wasn't just a setback, it was an execution. Without manufacturing capacity, there was no product. Without product, there was no proof of concept. Without proof of concept, the Marchand meeting, scheduled to begin in 4 hours, was theatre performed for an audience that wouldn't care. Her phone showed 17 missed calls from the New York office. The board had convened their emergency session. Marcus had sent 3 increasingly frantic texts asking if she was okay, and Gregory had sent nothing at all. She'd heard him in the suite next door until sometime past 3 in the morning. The low murmur of phone calls, the sharp sound of something being thrown against a wall, and then silence heavy as a tomb. They were both drowning. The only question was whether they'd go down fighting or simply let the water close over their heads. Sophia dressed with mechanical precision, a different suit, deep navy this time, with a silk blouse the color of champagne, pearl earrings, hair pulled back in a style that said she was in control, even when everything was burning. The breakfast room at 7 was nearly empty. Just early rising tourists and a scattering of business travelers who moved with the exhausted determination of people for whom 5-star hotels were offices with better coffee. Gregory was already there. He sat alone at a corner table, the Financial Times spread before him unread, a cup of espresso growing cold at his elbow. He'd changed suits, charcoal today, with a white shirt that made his skin look pale in the morning light. But it was his eyes that stopped her. The controlled intensity she'd come to expect had been replaced by something rawer, exhaustion, frustration, and beneath it all, what might have been defeat. She'd never seen Gregory Finch look defeated before. "May I?" Sophia gestured to the empty chair. He nodded without speaking. They sat in silence while a server materialized to pour coffee she wouldn't drink and offer pastries neither of them would touch. The rituals of civilization continuing while empires crumbled. "I've been in contact with the board," Gregory said finally, his voice rough with fatigue. "They want you on the first flight back to New York. The liquidation team has been activated. And the Marchand meeting. I'll handle it alone. Apologize for wasting her time. Try to salvage some professional dignity from the wreckage." Sophia set down her coffee cup with controlled precision. "No." Gregory's eyes finally met hers, and she saw surprise flicker in their depths. "Sophia, there's no point in... The meeting is in 3 hours. We have 3 hours to find a solution. There is no solution. The math is absolute. We have no manufacturing capacity. Game over. The game is over when I say it's over." She leaned forward, intensity burning through exhaustion. "You gave me 90 days. I've used 33. I still have 57 left." To do what exactly? Conjure suppliers from thin air? To pivot, again? Her mind was already racing, pieces clicking into place with the desperate speed of someone who had nothing left to lose. "The Milan supplier handled our leather goods, accessories ready to wear. What about haute couture?" "We don't have haute couture capacity. That's why we were repositioning as accessible luxury." "No, we were repositioning as made to order because retail is dead." "But what if we go further? What if Castellano becomes exclusively haute couture, ultra-premium, limited edition, artisan collaborations with individual ateliers instead of factory production?" Gregory stared at her. "That's insane. The margins would require price points that would position us above every other luxury brand in the market, not competing with LVMH, operating in a category beyond competition." She was speaking faster now, the idea crystallizing with each word. "Marchand isn't just a designer, she's an artist. What she wants isn't another commercial partnership. She wants creative freedom and a platform for actual art, which requires capital we don't have and manufacturing capacity that doesn't exist, which requires 3 master ateliers and a business model built on scarcity instead of scale." Sophia pulled out her phone, fingers flying across the screen. I know this sounds impossible, but give me 2 hours. Let me make some calls. If I can line up even one atelier willing to take a meeting, we go into Marchand with a different pitch entirely. Sophia, Gregory's voice was gentler than she'd ever heard it. You're exhausted. You've been working yourself to death for a month. And now you want to rebuild an entire strategy in 2 hours based on a model that's never been tested. Yes, this is desperation. This is innovation under pressure. There's a difference. She met his eyes, willing him to see what she saw. I'm not ready to give up, are you? Something shifted in Gregory's expression. Not quite hope, he was too controlled for that. But perhaps curiosity, or maybe just the recognition of someone who refused to accept defeat even when logic demanded surrender. 2 hours, he said quietly. But Sophia, if this doesn't work, I want you to know something. What? You were right. About the blind spots, about the patterns, about me punishing innocent people for someone else's sins. His jaw tightened. Watching you fight this hard for something everyone said was impossible. It's been a long time since I've seen that kind of courage. The words hung between them, weighted with everything they hadn't said on the jet, all the almosts and might-have-beens. Gregory, make your calls. I'll order more coffee. We're going to need it. For the next 117 minutes, Sophia Reed executed what would later be called either the most brilliant or the most reckless professional gambit of her career. She called every contact she'd made during her 3 years at Morgan Stanley. She leveraged relationships she'd built at Wharton. She found the personal phone numbers of 3 master artisans whose work appeared in museums and whose client lists included royalty. And she offered them something no corporate brand had ever offered: complete creative control, zero commercial interference, and a platform that would treat their work as art rather than product. 2 declined immediately. The timelines were impossible. The model was unproven. They had waiting lists measured in years. The third, a 72-year-old master couturier in Lyon named Marguerite Beaumont, listened to Sophia's entire pitch without interrupting. Then she asked a single question. Who is this really for, mademoiselle? The business or something else? Sophia, operating on 2 hours of sleep and running on pure adrenaline, answered with complete honesty. My grandmother cleaned houses for 40 years so I could have opportunities she never did. Every time I put on a suit like this, I think about her hands. How beautiful they could have been if they hadn't spent decades scrubbing other people's floors. This project? It's about creating something where artistry is valued, where craft matters, where the people who make beautiful things are treated like the artists they are. Silence stretched across the phone line for 15 seconds. Then, I will take one meeting this afternoon if you can come to Lyon. Bring your designs and your young man who is too scared to believe in beautiful things. He's not my... Sophia started, but Madame Beaumont had already disconnected. She looked up to find Gregory watching her with an expression she couldn't read. We have a meeting in Lyon, 4 o'clock this afternoon. Lyon is 427 kilometers from Paris. That's 4.5 hours by car. Which means we cancel Marchand, leave now, and hope Madame Beaumont can give us something to build on. Gregory was quiet for a long moment, his coffee cup cradled between his hands. Then he stood with the decisive grace of someone who'd made a choice. I'll have the car brought around. You have 15 minutes to prepare whatever presentation you can assemble in... He checked his watch. 13 minutes. What about Marchand? I'll call her myself. Explain that we have a more compelling opportunity that aligns with our new vision. He paused at the doorway, turning back with something almost like a smile. Besides, Celeste Marchand respects bold moves. Cancelling to chase a master couturier in Lyon, she'll either hate us or want to know more. They were in the car, a sleek Mercedes that smelled of leather and possibility. Within 20 minutes, Paris falling away behind them as they merged onto the A6 toward Lyon. The driver maintained steady speed, while Gregory and Sophia worked in the back seat, laptops balanced, phones ringing, the space between them charged with purpose and something neither would acknowledge. "Tell me about Beaumont," Gregory said, eyes on his screen but attention focused on her. Marguerite Beaumont, 72 years old, trained at the House of Dior in the 1970s when haute couture still meant something sacred. She left the fashion houses 30 years ago because she hated how commercialization was destroying artistry. Sophia pulled up images on her tablet. "Look at this work. Every piece is a sculpture." She works with maybe 5 clients per year, charges prices that make her mess look affordable, and has a waiting list of 7 years. Gregory studied the images. Gowns that looked like architecture, coats that appeared to defy gravity, details so intricate they required magnification to appreciate. This is art. Exactly. And she's never worked with a corporate brand because she believes corporations destroy everything they touch. So why would she meet with us? Sophia hesitated, then decided honesty was all she had left. I told her about my grandmother, about trying to build something where artistry matters more than quarterly earnings. Gregory's expression shifted. "You used your personal story as a business pitch." "I used the truth. Sometimes that's more powerful than strategy." "Sometimes," he said quietly, "it's also more dangerous." They worked in focused silence for the next 2 hours, breaking only when they stopped for fuel and terrible coffee at a rest station where truckers congregated and the bathroom smelled of industrial cleaner and defeat. Sophia stood outside breathing cold November air while Gregory handled a conference call with the New York board. Through the glass, she could see him pacing, his free hand gesturing with controlled intensity, his face severe in a way that would have terrified her a month ago. Now she just saw a man fighting as hard as she was for something that mattered. When he emerged 20 minutes later, his expression was grim. "The board wants a decision by close of business tomorrow. Liquidate Castellano or present a viable path forward. There's no more extension." 24 hours. 22, accounting for time zones. Sophia laughed, the sound slightly unhinged. "Well, at least we're not bored." Gregory studied her and something in his face softened. "How are you still standing? Most people would have collapsed by now." "Read, women don't collapse, we adapt." But even as she said it, she felt the exhaustion pulling at her bones, the weight of a month's worth of 16-hour days and impossible deadlines. She swayed slightly, and Gregory's hand shot out to steady her, fingers wrapping around her elbow with surprising gentleness. "Sophia, I'm fine. You're running on fumes and stubbornness. There's a difference between strength and self-destruction," says the man who works 70 hours a week and hasn't taken a vacation in 6 years. "Exactly. I recognize the symptoms because I wrote the manual on them." He didn't release her arm. "After this meeting, after we either save this project or bury it, you're going to sleep for 12 hours. Is that an order?" "It's a request, from someone who's watched you give everything you have and is starting to understand what that costs." The vulnerability in his voice caught her off guard. This wasn't Gregory Finch, CEO. This was just Gregory, and the distinction mattered more than she wanted to admit. "Only if you promise to do the same," she said softly. "Deal." He released her arm slowly, his fingers trailing down to her wrist before letting go entirely. "Now, let's go meet a legendary couturier and see if we can convince her to save us from our own ambition." Lyon emerged from autumn landscapes like a jewel, the Rhone and Saône rivers converging in a city that had been manufacturing silk and beauty for centuries. Madame Beaumont's atelier occupied a restored Renaissance building in Vieux Lyon, its stone facade carved with details that spoke of an era when artistry was mandatory, not optional. A young woman met them at the door, Beaumont's assistant, whose sharp eyes assessed them with the efficiency of someone used to dismissing inadequate supplicants. "You are punctual. Madame appreciates this." She led them through corridors where light filtered through ancient windows, illuminating walls hung with sketches and fabric samples that looked like abstract paintings. "She will see you in the studio. Please remove your shoes." The instruction was unexpected but absolute. They complied, and Sophia felt suddenly vulnerable in her stockinged feet, her expensive armor reduced to something more human. The studio was a cathedral of creation. 30-foot ceilings soared above workbenches covered in silks and threads that shimmered like liquid. Dress forms displayed works in progress, garments so beautiful they seemed impossible, and in the center of it all, backlit by windows that overlooked the river, stood Marguerite Beaumont. She was smaller than Sophia had expected, maybe 5 feet 2, with white hair pulled back in a severe bun and hands that moved with the economy of a surgeon. She wore black, simple, elegant, expensive in ways that had nothing to do with labels and everything to do with cut. Those eyes, sharp as broken glass, swept over them with clinical assessment. "You are the girl with the grandmother," she said to Sophia, her English accented but precise. "And you," she turned to Gregory, "you are the man who breaks beautiful women because one woman broke you." Gregory went perfectly still, his expression controlled, but his eyes betraying shock. "I research my potential partners, Monsieur Finch. Your reputation precedes you, as does your pain." Beaumont moved to a workbench, fingers trailing over fabric with unconscious affection. "So, you want me to help salvage your dying brand?" "Why should I care about corporate failure?" Sophia stepped forward. "Because it's not about the brand. It's about creating a model where artists like you have complete control, where craft isn't compromised by commercial pressure, where the people who create beauty are valued properly." Pretty words, but words are cheap. Show me something real. For the next 43 minutes, Sophia and Gregory presented the vision they'd been building, both the strategy crafted over 30 days and the desperate pivot assembled in hours. Beaumont listened without interrupting, her face revealing nothing. When they finished, silence filled the studio like held breath. Then Beaumont laughed. It was a sharp sound, almost harsh, but not unkind. "You are either visionaries or fools. Possibly both." She moved to stand directly in front of Sophia. "You girl, you remind me of myself at your age, too smart for your own survival, too stubborn to accept impossible odds." She glanced at Gregory. "And you hide behind numbers and control, because vulnerability terrifies you more than failure ever could." "Madame," Gregory started, but she held up one hand. "I will consider your proposal, but not for your business reasons. Because she," Beaumont gestured to Sophia, "understands something rare, that creation requires courage. That beauty demands sacrifice, that the best things we make come from the parts of ourselves we're most afraid to share." She moved to a cabinet and extracted a portfolio, laying it on the workbench. "These are designs I created 30 years ago. Too radical for the fashion houses, too expensive to produce commercially, too honest about what women's bodies actually look like beneath the lies fashion tells them." She opened the portfolio, revealing sketches that took Sophia's breath away. "If I agree to work with you, these are what we create, not what you think will sell, what needs to exist." Sophia studied the designs, powerful, feminine, celebrating rather than concealing, radical in their refusal to make women smaller. "Yes," she breathed, "these are perfect. They are impossible. Each piece would require 300 hours minimum. The materials alone would cost more than a luxury car, and you have no manufacturing infrastructure, no capital, no timeline. But if we did, Gregory's voice was quiet but intense, if we could solve those problems, would you partner with us? Beaumont studied him for a long moment. Answer me honestly, Monsieur Finch. Why do you care? You have billions. You could liquidate this division tomorrow and never notice the loss. Why fight so hard for something everyone says is already dead? Gregory glanced at Sophia, and something passed between them. An understanding built over 33 days of warfare and one almost kiss above the Atlantic. Because she cares, he said simply. And somewhere in the past month, I remembered what it felt like to care about something beyond the next quarterly report. Beaumont smiled, and it transformed her severe face into something luminous. Then yes, I will consider this partnership under one condition. Name it, Sophia said. You have 1 year, 12 months to prove this model works with my collection. If it succeeds, I will introduce you to 4 other artisans who share my philosophy. If it fails, you liquidate with grace and never speak of this again. 1 year. Sophia looked at Gregory. They'd come for a supplier to save a 90-day project. They were leaving with a partnership that extended their timeline and multiplied their risk by orders of magnitude. It was insane. It was also the only path forward. Yes, Gregory said. We accept your terms. They shook hands, Beaumont's grip stronger than expected, and then she was ushering them toward the door with the efficiency of someone whose time was measured in minutes. Go now. I have work. We will speak in 3 days to discuss details. And at the threshold she paused, touching Sophia's arm lightly. Your grandmother would be proud, not of your success, that is still uncertain, but of your courage, that is already proven. The words hit Sophia like a physical blow, emotion rising sharp in her throat. She managed a nod, not trusting her voice, and then they were back in the car, Lyon falling away behind them as they headed toward Paris, and a flight that would return them to New York, and a board meeting that would determine everything. They sat in silence for the first 20 minutes, both processing what had just happened. Then Gregory laughed, the sound startled out of him. We just committed to a 12-month project with zero infrastructure, uncertain capital, and an artist who will accept nothing less than perfection. I know. The board is going to have aneurysms. Multiple aneurysms. Possibly fatal ones. We can hope. He looked at her, really looked at her, and something in his expression made her breath catch. You did it. You found a way when there was no way. You convinced a legendary artisan to take a chance on a dying brand because you believed in something beyond profit. We convinced her. This wasn't just me. It was mostly you. His voice dropped lower, more intimate, despite the driver's presence. Sophia, I need to tell you something. Her heart hammered. What? That moment on the jet. Before the call, His phone erupted with the sharp insistence of an emergency ringtone for the second time in 2 days. The moment shattered. Gregory answered with controlled frustration, and Sophia watched his face change as he listened. Not fear this time, something worse, resignation. I understand. Yes. Tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. I'll present the options myself. He ended the call and turned to her, his expression carefully neutral. The board has moved the deadline. They want the final decision tomorrow morning. Liquidate or defend the new strategy in front of the full board and major shareholders. Tomorrow morning. We have 14 hours to prepare a presentation that will either save this project or end both our careers. Sophia felt the exhaustion crash over her like a wave. 33 days of work. 2 countries in 48 hours. a partnership that changed everything about the project's scope and timeline, and 14 hours to convince 27 skeptical board members and shareholders that it wasn't insanity. "Then we better get started," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Gregory studied her for a long moment. Then he opened his laptop, and they began the work that would consume the entire flight home and the hours beyond. But as Paris gave way to highways and eventually to Charles de Gaulle Airport, as they boarded the jet that would carry them back across the Atlantic, Sophia couldn't stop replaying what Gregory had started to say. That moment on the jet, before the call. As what had he been about to confess? And why did the interruption feel less like chance and more like the universe forcing them to make impossible choices? Professional success or personal truth? The project or the connection? The armor or the heart? By the time they landed in New York, with 7 hours until the board meeting that would determine everything, Sophia understood with crystalline clarity that tomorrow morning wouldn't just decide the fate of Castellano. It would force Gregory Finch to choose between the fortress he'd built and the possibility of something real, and she had no idea which way he would fall. The Finch Global Holdings boardroom at 8:45 in the morning was a gallery of skepticism rendered in bespoke suits and calculated expressions. 27 people occupied the space: board members, major shareholders, legal counsel, and every single one of them looked at Sophia Reed like she was an accident waiting to be documented. She stood at the head of that massive table, the same table where 33 days ago she'd committed what everyone had called career suicide. Her presentation was loaded, her notes organized, and her hands, hidden beneath the table's edge, were shaking with a combination of exhaustion and adrenaline that had kept her functional through a night without sleep. Gregory sat at the opposite end, chairman's position, his face an expressionless mask. They'd worked until 4 in the morning, refining arguments and anticipating objections. At some point around 2, he'd removed his tie and rolled his sleeves, and she'd kicked off her shoes, and they'd existed in that strange intimacy of shared purpose where everything else fell away. He'd made her eat something around 3, ordering food from the only place still delivering, sitting across from her in the empty executive dining room, while Manhattan glittered below them like a promise neither dared voice. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he'd said quietly, "I want you to know something." "What?" "You've already won. Not the board vote. Something more important." He'd met her eyes across cold pasta and exhaustion. "You made me question everything I thought was absolute truth. That's rarer than you know." Now, in the harsh light of mourning and corporate judgment, those words felt like another lifetime. "Let's begin." Gregory's voice cut through the ambient tension. "Ms. Reed will present the revised Castellano strategy. I expect questions to wait until she's finished." Thomas Whitmore, 68 years old and the board's most vocal skeptic, made a sound of impatience. "With respect, Gregory, we're here to approve liquidation, not listen to more fantasy economics from you're here because I convened this meeting, Thomas, and you'll extend Ms. Reed the courtesy of listening before you render judgment." Gregory's tone was ice over steel. "Please proceed, Sophia." She stood, activating the presentation on screens that descended from the ceiling with whisper-quiet efficiency. The first slide showed Madame Beaumont's atelier, light streaming through ancient windows onto works of art masquerading as clothing. 33 days ago, I was given an impossible task. Save $1 billion division that every analyst recommended we liquidate. The traditional approach would have failed, so I didn't take the traditional approach. For the next 28 minutes, Sophia presented the vision she and Gregory had built from desperation and determination. Not accessible luxury, not mass-market premium, but something entirely new. A model where Finch Global became a platform for master artisans, where each piece was art first and product second, where scarcity created value that transcended commercial calculation. She showed Beaumont's designs, sketches so beautiful that even Whitmore leaned forward to see better. She presented financial projections that looked insane until you understood the mathematics of ultra-premium positioning. She explained how one collection, properly executed, could generate more profit than 17 retail locations hemorrhaging money, and she told them what it would cost. 12 months, complete creative control ceded to the artisans, and the courage to bet everything on a model that had never been tested at corporate scale. When she finished, silence filled the boardroom like smoke after an explosion. Then the questions began. The capital requirements are astronomical. This from Jennifer Chen, CFO, her voice careful. We're talking about investing $18 million in production for a collection that might not sell a single piece. We're talking about investing in proof of concept. If Beaumont's collection succeeds, we have immediate access to 4 other artisans of equivalent caliber. 5 collections at this margin structure would generate more profit than Castellano's previous 3 years combined. And if it fails, Whitmore again, his skepticism etched in every syllable, we've wasted a year and millions of dollars on an experiment. If it fails, you liquidate as planned. The only difference is the timing. Sophia met his eyes without flinching. But if it succeeds, you've positioned Finch Global at the forefront of a luxury revolution. First mover advantage in a market your competitors don't even know exists yet. This is unprecedented. Another board member, Sarah Kim, 45, and known for her conservative voting record. You're asking us to completely reverse established liquidation plans based on a single artisan's willingness to consider a partnership. I'm asking you to recognize that unprecedented problems require unprecedented solutions. Sophia pulled up the final slide, a graph showing the declining trajectory of traditional luxury retail versus the exponential growth of artisan direct models. The market is shifting. We can shift with it, or we can liquidate assets and watch competitors claim the territory we could have owned. Gregory stood, his movement drawing every eye. Before we vote, I need to say something. His voice was controlled, but carried an undertone Sophia had never heard before. Something I should have said years ago. The room went perfectly still. Ms. Reed came into this company 33 days ago and did something no one else had the courage to do. She challenged me, publicly, in front of all of you. He moved from his position at the head of the table, walking slowly along its length. My response was to assign her a project designed to fail. I gave her a failing division, inadequate resources, and an impossible timeline, expecting her to crash and burn so I could point to her failure as proof of theories I'd held for 15 years. Sophia's breath caught. She hadn't expected this. Those theories were based on one woman's betrayal 15 years ago. Victoria Chen, some of you remember her, stole proprietary information, embezzled funds, and destroyed both my company and my personal life in a single calculated move. His jaw tightened. I spent 15 years ensuring that could never happen again by systematically preventing women from reaching positions where they could hurt me. The confession hung in the air like smoke. Several board members exchanged glances. Whitmore's expression had shifted from skepticism to something more complicated. What I called pattern recognition was actually prejudice. What I called strategic hiring was systematic discrimination. And what I called protection was cowardice. Gregory stopped walking, standing now in the center of the room, vulnerable in a way Sophia had never witnessed. Watching Sophia Reed fight for 33 days to save something everyone, including me, wanted to abandon, it forced me to confront truths I've been avoiding for a decade and a half. He turned, facing the entire board. "I've cost this company billions in missed opportunities because I rejected proposals from qualified women based on gender rather than merit. I've created a toxic culture that drove away talent we desperately needed. And I've let personal pain contaminate professional judgment to the point where I almost destroyed something extraordinary simply because I was afraid to admit I might be wrong." Jennifer Chen spoke carefully. "Gregory, what exactly are you saying?" "I'm saying that effective immediately. I'm implementing sweeping changes to company culture, hiring practices, and leadership development. I'm appointing an independent committee to review every termination of a female executive over the past 10 years and determine if restitution is warranted. And..." He looked directly at Sophia. "I'm recommending that Sophia Reed be appointed Vice President of Strategic Innovation, with full authority over the Castellano project and any future ventures that require the kind of courage she's demonstrated." The room erupted in controlled chaos, voices overlapping, objections raised, questions shouted. Sophia stood frozen, her mind racing to process what Gregory had just done. He'd publicly acknowledged his bias, committed to systemic change, and promoted her to a level that would make her one of the most powerful executives in the company. It was everything she'd fought for. It was also impossible to accept. "Stop!" Her voice cut through the noise, sharp enough to command silence. "Mr. Finch, I need to speak with you, privately, now." Something flickered in his eyes, surprise, perhaps concern, but he nodded. 10-minute recess, then we vote." They left the boardroom together, the weight of 27 stairs burning into their backs. Gregory led her to a small conference room, closing the door behind them with controlled precision. "What's wrong?" he asked immediately. "I thought, you can't promote me." Sophia's voice was steady, despite the chaos in her chest. "Not like this, not now." "Why not? You've earned it. You've proven your value beyond any reasonable—" "I've proven it to you, not to them, not to myself." She moved to the window, needing distance to think. "If you promote me now, after this project, after everything that's happened between us, every person in that boardroom will believe I slept my way to the position. That's ridiculous. Your work speaks for itself." "Does it? Or does it speak for a woman who got close to the CEO and leveraged that proximity for advancement?" She turned to face him. "Gregory, I came into this company to build something no one could take away. If I accept this promotion now, I'll spend the rest of my career wondering if I earned it, or if you gave it to me because of feelings neither of us can afford to acknowledge." Understanding dawned in his eyes, followed by something that looked like pain. "So what are you saying?" "I'm saying I accept the VP role, but I'm also saying that you and I, whatever this is between us, it goes on hold for 1 year, 12 months where I prove I earned this position independently, where every success is mine, not ours, where there's no question that I belong at that level." 1 year. His voice was quiet, controlled. "You're asking me to wait a year to—" "I'm asking you to give me the space to succeed without the shadow of our relationship compromising that success." She stepped closer, close enough to see the conflict in his grey eyes. "I need this, Gregory. I need to know that when I sit in that VP chair, I got there because I'm the best person for the job, not because the CEO has feelings for me." He was silent for a long moment, his jaw working. Then, "You're right. Of course you're right." He ran a hand through his hair, a gesture of frustration that made him seem more human, less CEO. "But you should know this isn't just feelings, Sophia. What happened over the past 33 days? I haven't felt this alive, this challenged, this uncertain in 15 years. That terrifies me. It terrifies me too." Her voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Which is exactly why we need to do this right. Build something real on a foundation of equals, not on the complications of power dynamics and professional debt. Gregory nodded slowly, then extended his hand in a formal gesture that broke her heart a little. 1 year. You have complete autonomy over the Castellano project and any strategic initiatives you want to pursue. I'll maintain appropriate professional distance, and in 12 months, we see where we both are, as equals. She shook his hand, the contact both painful and necessary. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I think you're making the harder choice, which is probably how I know it's the right one. They returned to the boardroom with 90 seconds to spare, taking their positions at opposite ends of that massive table. The vote was contentious. 9 board members wanted immediate liquidation, 7 wanted to table the decision for further analysis, and 11 voted to approve the Beaumont partnership with Sophia as VP of Strategic Innovation. 11 votes. Enough to move forward. As the meeting adjourned, Sophia caught Gregory's eyes across the room. He nodded once, a gesture that carried acknowledgement, respect, and perhaps promise. Then he was gone, disappearing into the marble corridors of an empire he'd built from nothing and was just beginning to rebuild from something better. 12 months later, the Castellano flagship opening in Soho was the kind of event that stopped Manhattan in its tracks. Not because of size, the space occupied barely 800 square feet, but because of what it represented. Through windows of museum-quality glass, passers-by could see 7 pieces of wearable art displayed like sculptures. Not for immediate sale, not available for mass consumption, but viewable by appointment only, each piece accompanied by documentation of the artisan who'd created it and the 300-plus hours invested in its creation. The first Beaumont collection had sold out within 6 hours of its digital launch. 4 pieces to private collectors, 2 to museums, and 1 to a celebrity whose stylist understood that owning a Castellano Beaumont original meant possessing something that transcended fashion. The profit margin had been 37%, 18 times higher than traditional luxury retail. Within 3 months, 2 more master artisans had joined the platform. Within 6 months, Castellano had been featured in every major fashion publication, from Vogue to the Financial Times. The FT article's headline, How One VP Saved a Billion-Dollar Brand by Burning the Playbook. And throughout it all, Sophia Reed and Gregory Finch had maintained perfect professional distance. They worked together on strategic decisions. He deferred to her expertise. She consulted him on financial implications. They attended the same board meetings, the same corporate events, the same investor presentations. They were photographed together dozens of times, always maintaining appropriate space, always professional. It was excruciating and necessary. Now, on the evening of the flagship opening, Sophia stood in that jewel box space wearing a Beaumont original, midnight blue silk that moved like water, with embroidery so intricate it had required 273 hours to complete. Her natural hair was styled in elegant twists, diamond earrings catching light with every movement. She'd done it, built something extraordinary, proved her value beyond doubt. The VP role was unquestionably earned. Her success, documented in quarterly reports and media coverage, and the undeniable reality of a division that had been dying 12 months ago and was now profitable. Through the crowd of investors, press, and artisans, she caught sight of Gregory. He stood near the back, deliberately inconspicuous in his perfectly tailored suit, watching her with an expression she'd learned to read over 12 months of professional restraint. Pride, respect, and something else that made her heart race despite a year of discipline. When the official presentations concluded, when the last investor had been charmed and the last photographer had left, the space emptied until only a handful remained. Madame Beaumont, smoking a cigarette despite the no-smoking policy and clearly not caring, Marcus Chen, who'd been promoted to senior director and had become one of Sophia's closest allies. Jennifer Chen, who'd evolved from skeptic to supporter, and Gregory, still standing in that same position, waiting. Beaumont caught Sophia's eye and smiled. "Go, child. You have earned this conversation. We will close up." Sophia crossed the space on unsteady legs, the year of waiting suddenly collapsing into this single moment. Gregory spoke first. 12 months. 12 months. She stopped 3 feet away, maintaining distance even now. "I proved what I needed to prove. You proved what everyone else already knew, that you're exceptional, that you earned every success." He took 1 step closer. "Can I tell you what I learned in 12 months? Yes. That power without partnership is just another kind of prison. That success without someone to share it with feels hollow." Another step. Close enough now that she could see the silver threading deeper through his hair, the new lines at the corners of his eyes, from smiling more than he had in 15 years. "And that waiting for something real is worth every minute of discipline required. Gregory, I'm not done." His voice was gentle but firm. 12 months ago, you told me we needed to build something on a foundation of equals. You were right. So before I say anything else, I need to know, do you still want this? Do you still want us? The question hung between them, weighted with a year of restraint and longing and the slow-built foundation of mutual respect. Sophia closed the remaining distance, her hand finding his, with the certainty of someone who'd earned the right to make this choice freely. "Yes, but with one condition." "Name it. We do this carefully, privately at first until we're sure. I won't have our relationship overshadow the work we've built. I won't let anyone diminish what we've accomplished by reducing it to a corporate romance." Agreed. His fingers interlaced with hers, the contact electric after months of professional distance. "Though, for the record, there's nothing simple about what I feel for you. This isn't a corporate romance. This is complicated and real and worth protecting," Sophia finished. "I know. I feel it too." They stood like that for a moment, hands clasped, a year of waiting distilled into simple connection. Through the windows, Manhattan glittered in November darkness, the city where both of them had fought so hard to build something that couldn't be taken away. "So what happens now?" Gregory asked quietly. "Now? We have dinner. Somewhere private, where we can actually talk without 27 board members analyzing our body language." She smiled. "And then we figure out what it looks like to build a relationship between equals who happen to be transforming a $47 billion company. Ambitious. You expected anything less?" He laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Never. Though I should warn you, I'm terrible at relationships. The last one ended with embezzlement and heartbreak." "Then it's good I'm exceptional at impossible challenges." She squeezed his hand. "We'll figure it out, together, as partners." "Partners?" He tested the word, then smiled. "I like that better than CEO and VP. We can be both. Professional excellence and personal connection aren't mutually exclusive. We just have to be intentional about maintaining boundaries." Speaking of boundaries, Gregory glanced at Madame Beaumont, who was watching them with unconcealed satisfaction while deliberately not watching them at all. "Should we leave before she starts offering commentary on our relationship dynamics?" "Probably wise." They left the flagship together, walking into Manhattan night air that smelled of winter approaching and possibility. A car waited, Gregory's driver discreet as always, but instead of entering immediately, they stood on the sidewalk, savoring the moment. "Sophia Reed," Gregory said, his voice carrying a formality that belied the tenderness in his eyes. "VP of Strategic Innovation, the woman who saved my company and possibly my soul. Would you have dinner with me? Gregory Finch, CEO, the man who gave me an impossible challenge and then watched me exceed it. Yes. But I'm paying. VPs make excellent money, and I believe in maintaining financial independence. Compromise. We split it, because partners share burdens and victories equally. Deal. They shook hands, the gesture both professional and intimate, then finally entered the car. As Manhattan streets blurred past, Sophia felt something settle in her chest. Not satisfaction. There were still battles to fight, projects to build, challenges ahead. But certainty. She'd built something no one could take away. Not success, though she'd achieved that, but the knowledge that she belonged in rooms where decisions were made, that her voice mattered, that she'd earned her position through excellence rather than proximity to power. And now, with that foundation secure, she could allow herself what she'd denied for 12 months, the possibility of partnership with someone who'd learned to see past his own wounds. It wouldn't be easy. Gregory was still learning to trust. She was still learning to accept vulnerability. They'd both spent years building armor that was difficult to remove. But as the car turned onto a quiet street in the West Village, pulling up to a restaurant that looked intimate and private, Sophia felt a Reed woman's certainty. The only way out was through, and she'd never walked away from a challenge yet. Gregory opened her door, offering his hand with old-fashioned courtesy. She took it, stepping out into cold November air and the warmth of his smile. "Ready?" he asked. "Always." They walked into the restaurant together, equals, partners, two people who'd fought their way to this moment through determination, sacrifice, and the courage to transform not just a company, but themselves. Behind them, through glass windows, the Castellano flagship glowed like a promise fulfilled. Inside, Madame Beaumont's art hung in elegant simplicity, proof that beauty required no apology and excellence demanded no compromise. And ahead, through the restaurant door, lay the beginning of something neither of them had expected, but both had earned. A love built on mutual respect, hard-won trust, and the understanding that the best partnerships were those where both people arrived as their fullest selves. It had taken 33 days of war, 12 months of waiting, and the courage to rebuild everything they thought they knew about power, success, and connection. But in the end, Sophia Reed had done what she'd set out to do, built an empire no one could take away. She'd just discovered that empire was even better when shared with someone brave enough to meet her as an equal. And Gregory Finch, who'd spent 15 years building walls, found that the right person didn't break them down. She inspired him to dismantle them himself, brick by carefully guarded brick, until what remained wasn't a fortress. Just a man, finally willing to be seen.